There's plenty of room up front. In fact, this guy, Mark, he's going to take a big seat right there. Yeah, right there. Might just have to go to you for some expertise. So it's 7 o'clock, and you're on time. And I think that on-time people always need to be rewarded with a program that starts on time, don't you think? I think it's only fair. So why don't we get the panelists to come on up? I'm Jane Farrow, and we have a couple hours to talk about a big topic. We're going to have some introducing words from Sidewalk Toronto. We'll tell you about the panelists. The panelists are going to have some general remarks. The panelists are going to talk amongst themselves a little bit, and we're going to have most of the evening be a roving conversation with all of you, full of questions, comments, insights, and expertise that you can bring to this. So we have all our panelists, Cherise, Rafael, Stephanie, and I guess we're ready to get going. So I'm going to throw it to Joanna Greenbaum to do a quick introduction from Sidewalk Toronto. There you go.
Yeah, so just quickly, my name is Johanna Greenbaum. I'm the Director of Development and Planning at Sidewalk Labs. I'm really excited to see you all here today. We have a fantastic panel, 3 really passionate people about affordable housing who have agreed to come here and talk with us tonight. So I'm very excited that we have Rafael, Cherise, and Stephanie, all from different cities with different perspectives. I wanted to welcome you on behalf of the Sidewalk Toronto team, and particularly my counterpart on the Housing Working Group, Leslie Gash, who's here tonight, right here in front. And let you know that the conversation and the public talk that we're having here today is on one of the most important issues facing cities all over the world, affordable housing. We're doing 4 of these talks over the course of the next few months. This is the second. And it's not specifically focused on our project here on the waterfront. It is part of the larger public discourse. Our next public engagement on the project specifically is next Thursday, May 3rd, at the Daniel Spectrum Center, Thursday evening. So if you're interested in engaging on that project specifically, please come out. I am, again, just really excited and wanted to thank you guys all for being here, and I will hand it back to Jane.
All right, thanks. All right, mic goes there. Okay, just a little bit of housekeeping. The event is being live streamed, but the camera is strictly on the front of the stage here, correct? So there's no need for anyone to sign a photo waiver. No one's being photographed. But if you're going to ask a question, I think the audio, capturing the audio on that will be critical, so we'll have roving microphones for that. Now, can everyone hear me clearly now, or is the audio picking up pretty good? Okay, so when it's not, do not wait for us to notice that. Just say louder, or just tell us to speak up. That's entirely doable. Washrooms, where are the washrooms? They're over there. It's like not really out by the lake. Nice view. But, just avail yourself of the facilities. There's also a water supply at the back with cucumbers, complimentary cucumbers in them. It's tasty. Hashtags. You've got a little program that you got going in. It's got the hashtags. It's got some of the other consultation events. So any other questions before we get rolling? We're ready to go. Okay. So I am Jane Farrow. My background is in Jane's Walk. I worked with Jane's Walk for a number of years. I did CBC radio broadcasting before that as a host and producer, and realized, actually, Mom, I do have a job. It's called getting people talking. So it's ended up getting me into this sort of city building realm, and doing public consultation work, working with neighborhoods to sort of figure out how to feed their expertise into planning and housing and transportation planning, stuff like that. So I'm delighted to be part of the Sidewalk consultation strategy by hosting or moderating these public debates, which sort of draws, I think, on my my journalism experience as a host and producer to sort of just get the ideas out there, ask questions, and get people talking. Because I think this evening is really, Sidewalk Toronto's effort is to really just engage with the ideas like all of us, try to work through the concepts here that are really big ones and at stake for so many cities, and this one being perhaps the biggest of all, affordable housing. So I'm keen to be here and help get prime the pump and get everyone talking and offering their expertise. So we will have now some opening remarks from all three of our panelists. So I'm going to introduce to you just a little bit more about the idea of the background for affordable housing in Toronto, and get to Rafael, who's our first speaker. So tonight we'll be talking about the future of affordable housing, and you know that's a question before us and many people here, many cities. Sidewalk Toronto has brought us together tonight to have a thoughtful airing of options and approaches and look at some case studies and innovations showing how cities are tackling this persistent challenge. And the objective tonight is to listen and ask questions and contribute to the dialogue on how we all might go about understanding Toronto's housing affordability crisis on a deeper level. In this way, the discussion feeds into the broader conversation about what's being planned and conceptualized for Quayside. And you're encouraged to learn and kick the tires on these ideas along with Sidewalk Toronto. So let's set the context. The GTA might be a great place to locate your business and go to school, enjoy the ravine system, and get a job, but it's never been harder to find housing. The demand for affordable rental housing in this city has spiked, and the people who have a place to live are loath to leave it, adding even more pressure to an already tight rental market. The federal government has declared housing a right and has pledged to put billions into housing over the next decade alongside their provincial and municipal partners. But that doesn't move the needle in the short term if you're a millennial or a young family trying to finance a condo purchase or get out of the rent racket. The need to create housing that is more affordable to more people is the greatest challenge facing growing cities like Toronto. Our guests this evening are challenging cities to think differently about how to get there, with innovative approaches to housing policy, financing models, and community partnerships. So tonight, we're going to hear from three of them. So let's get things going with Rafael Cestero. He is a nonprofit housing developer and policy expert from New York City who has worked in affordable housing under Mayor Bloomberg. But I would like to just say also before Rafael gets going, our other guest here is Cherise Burda. Many of you will know her. She's a Toronto, very active in the housing and city building conversations. She's the executive director of the Ryerson City Building Institute. And Stephanie Allen on the end is from Vancouver. She's a nonprofit community housing developer who focuses on partnering with landowners who are driven by a commitment to community. So let's start with Rafael. Just a few more details about him. He's a former commissioner with the New York City's Department of Housing, Preservation and Development, where he helped implement and oversee Mayor Bloomberg's new housing marketplace plan, a multi-billion-dollar initiative to finance the creation and preservation of 165,000 units of affordable housing. Currently, Rafael is the president and CEO of Community Preservation Corporation, which is a nonprofit affordable housing and community revitalization finance company providing capital solutions throughout New York State. Now, it's a little heavy on the financials in that, but as we know, housing has a lot to do with the financials, so he's going to make that make sense to talk about a few things he's doing in New York. Take it away, Rafael.
Thank you, Jane, and thanks everybody for coming. The good news is that I have spent almost 30 years in working in affordable housing in New York. So can you hear me? Louder? So I am an expert in New York City. The bad news is that, full disclosure, I really don't know anything about Toronto or Canada or the housing challenges other than what I've read over the course of the last couple of weeks in preparing for this. So I am not an expert in your community, in your town, but I was asked to come and talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing in New York and have done in New York to try to address some of the affordable housing challenges in our city. And I think some of those lessons may be applicable. Obviously, there are very significant differences, but hopefully they're interesting and helpful. Is this going to flip the slides here? Let's see. Sorry. I don't know. Technical difficulties? Do we have an expert on the clicker in the room?
You don't know anything about clickers.
There it is. It worked. There it is. Okay.
Toronto and clickers. I don't know, Rafael.
Yeah. So let me just tell you a little bit about my current role. I am the president and CEO of the Community Preservation Corporation. CPC is a 44-year-old nonprofit organization that has worked in affordable housing in New York and throughout New York State. We are committed. Our mission is all about affordable housing. We believe that housing is central, not just to enhancing people's lives, but to creating thriving, vibrant neighborhoods. We are a financial services provider. We provide debt and equity, and we are actively involved in owning rental housing as a solution to the affordable housing crisis in New York. We are very much a creature of both the public and private sector. And this is one of the themes that I will talk about throughout my comments. We work very closely with government, with commercial banks, with local nonprofit and for-profit developers to pool the resources together necessary to create affordable housing in New York. So our model is very much about bringing the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and the public sector together to incentivize and create affordable housing units. The model in the United States is really based off of a system that focuses on providing incentives to private owners, creating financing tools so that the government is actively and directly involved in financing affordable housing, and working with both nonprofit and for-profit organizations, and then using their powers in zoning and land use to create the right environment so that units can be created. So really it's a system that is about incentivizing nonprofit and for-profit actors to be able to build and own long-term affordable housing. And in New York City, we have been doing just that for almost 4 decades and trying to wrestle with the affordable housing challenges we face in New York. It's always helpful, I think, to talk about a couple of just the key facts about New York City's housing market. New York City has 3.5 million housing units, of which 2.5 million are rental. So we are a renter town. We are a town where people rent their homes and they live in them for their entire lives. Rental housing is seen as the vehicle in which you are most likely to be able to find a place to live and raise your family in New York. The million homeowner units are a mix of single-family homes, condos, and co-ops. We have all of those homeownership models, but we are a predominantly rental town. And we are a town where we have a rent regulation system. Of those 2.5 million rental units, about 1 million of them are subject to the rent regulation system, which governs how much rent increases can be and how much rent increases owners can take. So we have both a rental market, a strong rental market in New York, but we have a highly regulated rental market. The vacancy rate in New York hovers somewhere between 2.5% and 3.5% pretty consistently across all income levels and all rent levels. We have started lately to see, with luxury development happening significantly, that the luxury rental rate is starting to rise into the 6 or 7% range, but affordable rentals are still in the 2.5 to 3.5 range. So what has New York City done to try to create an environment where more of those rental units are affordable and where more affordable units are being created? Since the late 70s, when New York City went through a huge disinvestment across all of its neighborhoods, the population was fleeing New York, and the city itself became the largest landowner in many neighborhoods. Famous New York City neighborhoods like the South Bronx, Harlem, Bedford-Stuyvesant. The city of New York was the main landlord, and it took back buildings for tax foreclosure, and it created what is essentially, I said this earlier, is essentially the largest land bank ever in the United States. At the end of that disinvestment period, the city of New York owned 110,000 apartments and thousands and thousands of parcels of land. And so there was a need to create a strategy for how would you then sort of dispose of that land and those apartment units and return them back to productive use. And so beginning in the 80s with Mayor Koch, and then continuing through the Bloomberg administration and into today's administration, New York City has a 30-year history of very active and progressive government involvement in affordable housing. To be very simplistic about it, that revolves around 4 basic tools. The first is that the city has, for years, been selling land to both nonprofit and for-profit developer and owners of affordable housing for $1 in exchange for them building buildings that are affordable, and that where they lock in affordability through a deed restriction regulatory agreement for somewhere between 30 years and forever, depending on the site and the nature of the project. So land and the disposition of that land and how the city uses the land that it owns as a tool to help incentivize affordable housing has been one of the 4 pillars of every housing plan the city has had. The second is property tax policy. So the city has always had a system where property taxes are abated in exchange for affordable housing units. That system allows owners to have a lower cost of property taxes and allows them to keep rents lower so that they can keep units affordable. So owners can get anywhere from a 20 to a 40 to 50-year tax abatement in exchange for providing affordable housing in the project. The third piece of it is land and land use and zoning. And New York City has, for a long time, has used density and zoning and inclusionary zoning as a way to incentivize affordable housing. When I was in government, we significantly upped that ante and created significant inclusionary zoning programs where we used a significant density bonus for private development. That then, in exchange for that density bonus, there was a requirement that you kept 20% of the units affordable in perpetuity in every project. That has varied in how the city has done that over the years, but zoning and density is a key component of the housing strategy in New York. And then the last one, which is the one that is always the jaw dropper, is money. This year, the city of New York, to subsidize development of affordable housing, will spend upwards of $1.5 billion. And they will start and create in the neighborhood of 20,000 units. That is a massive commitment. And those dollars are city tax levy dollars. So it's city taxpayers are paying money in their taxes, and that money is then turning around and being used to fund affordable housing.
This is New Yorkers paying for affordable living spaces to be built.
This is New Yorkers believing that affordable housing is important enough that they're willing to have their tax dollars go invest in affordable housing.
Getting land for $1. Yeah, it's pretty major. Land for $1 in some cases. Density bonuses, buildings that have in perpetuity affordable rent, RGI, rent geared to income, and the taxpayers are actually footing the bill. Let's see a slow motion shock jaw drop here, Cherise.
And by the way, New York City is not the only city in the United States that's doing this. In the last year, the city of Los Angeles, both the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles, by referendum, overwhelmingly approved by a margin of 70% new taxes to support affordable housing development in Los Angeles. So it is something that is happening in many cities across the country. New York was the sort of founder of that and beginning of that, and really created the notion that cities can take on this issue of affordable housing. So in my opening remarks, I just want to give a couple of quick examples to sort of highlight how we did this in New York. The first one here is a project called Hunters Point South. Hunters Point South is on the Queens waterfront. It's along the East River in New York.
Has anyone ever been there, seen that, know the neighborhood?
Anybody know?
All right, Hunters Point people in the house? People that know it, at least.
So it is waterfront that overlooks Manhattan and the Manhattan skyline. And when I was in city government, we worked on a strategy to buy a huge piece of the Queens waterfront that had laid fallow for many, many, many years. It was old industrial land. It was actually owned by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which is the transportation authority in New York. And we were able to buy that from New York State. And, and then when we bought it, we paid real money for it, in the neighborhood of $100 million. I can't remember exactly what the number was. But what we did with it was we then committed it to affordable housing. And the city took it through a rezoning process. We took it through a community process to look at density and how it would be built. And what is happening there now on this 11 acres of the waterfront is that 5,000 units of affordable housing are in the development process. It is a 5-phase project. The first phase is built. It is 100% affordable. It's 11 or 1,200 units. Affordable mixed income, so affordable at different levels. Some for moderate income households, all the way down to very low income households.
I want to actually get you to just explain that, just
Sure.
Rafael. So affordable means 30%. Can you explain the difference between moderate affordable and RGI, rent geared income affordable?
Sure.
This development of 11 acres has 100% affordable housing. So what does that mean? There's
So-
no market rate.
In the first phase, there's no market rate. At the end of the day, the overall site will probably be 60 to 70% affordable. There will be some market rate that is developed on the site. So when we talk about affordable housing in New York, we talk about housing that ranges from serving households. When we describe low income, we're talking about households that earn below 60% of the median income for the city. So what is that? In New York, that is for a family of 4, 60% of median income is $60,000 in that kind of range and below. And that the affordable housing definition for New York goes all the way up to 125, 130, sometimes even 150% of median income. So you can be serving a family that makes $125,000, $130,000. In New York City, that family still has a very hard time affording the market rate rent that is being charged in the city. So there's a gradation of incomes and rents at a mixed income development like Hunters Point South. And so just a quick word on how the city develops a site like this. So it was divided up into 5 separate development parcels. There was a competition that was run, and the sites were awarded to partnerships between nonprofit and for-profit developers, who were then sold the land for $1. They were given tax abatements and subsidy in exchange for building these 1,200 units. And the subsidies can range anywhere from, it can range up to about $150,000 per unit in a subordinate subsidized financing that the city provides. So that's where I say $1 billion is being invested by the city. That's how they're doing it. They're putting it into these projects in 1% subordinate loans or forgivable loans that are then able to underwrite the cost of building a 30-story, 1,200 unit project in Hunters Point South. So this project has the first phase built. The second phase is about to begin construction. The third phase was just awarded by the city. So the other important point about this is that these kinds of sites are programmed and they cross over multiple years. This will take, at the end of the day, will take 10 years at least to be fully built out, just with the cycle and timing of how development works. The second example that I wanted to give you is also about how the nonprofit and the for-profit sector are teaming together to buy existing rental housing in New York and preserving it for the long run. This project is a project that actually CPC, my organization, is a one-third owner in. We put a partnership together with 2 for-profit investors. We bought 6,000 units that were unsold in a broken condo that had failed, put it through a $250 to $300 million renovation to bring the units up to standard, and have been operating it as an affordable rental community for the last 15 years. The important thing for me in bringing this up is that it's an example of how actually the for-profit sector and the nonprofit sector can work together and preserve a complex like this that was built in the 40s as affordable housing, but was in significant distress, but that everybody can earn a rate of return for that investment. The average rent increase over the last 15 years at Parkchester has been between 2% and 3%. So there have been very controlled and very limited rent increases that have happened. The rent today at Parkchester is affordable to a family of 4 that earns anywhere from $40,000 a year to $75,000 a year, depending on the unit and the size of unit and the location of the unit. This is an example of how we're not just building new units, but we're identifying apartments that could be converted into affordable housing. And the city's role in this really was, the only city role in this was a tax abatement. There was a tax abatement provided based on the renovation that we did at the time of acquiring and renovating it. The last example that I wanted to give is a more recent example. In New York City, we're struggling with a very increasing and growing homeless problem. And one of the challenges that we face in New York City as it relates to the homeless crisis is that in New York City we have something called a right to shelter. And that means that anybody, regardless of circumstance, can show up literally on the steps of City Hall, and the city has to provide them with shelter. So it creates a huge burden on the city in order to create both permanent and temporary shelter for homeless individuals and families. One of the biggest challenges that we face in New York is how do you finance the temporary side of that? We have a mechanism in place to finance the permanent side, but we do not have good mechanisms in place to finance the temporary shelter. And so the model that I show you here is a model where government is providing a long-term contract that the private sector is actually able to finance on behalf of a nonprofit operator to build a new shelter. So we're coming at it from both. There's no actual development subsidies involved in this model. It is simply a contract to operate long-term an emergency shelter residence for homeless individuals.
Fascinating, amazing. Thank you, Rafael. An excellent overview in the types of work that you've been involved in, and a very interesting contrast to the way things get done in Toronto and possibly Vancouver. So let's hear a little bit more about Toronto. Cherise Burda, as you know, is the Executive Director of the Ryerson City Building Institute, and was formerly the Pembina Institute's Ontario Director and a Program Director for the David Suzuki Foundation. Cherise's deep background in policy, advocacy, and research is reflected in a long list of publications and reports on transportation, sustainable cities, and clean energy solutions. And as you may know, the CBI is currently digging in on Toronto's unaffordability crisis. and has some intriguing new research to do with the missing middle. So I'll let Cherise talk about that.
Great. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about a recent report that we did when it comes to supply. So I'm going to dig into a bit of a supply myth here. Okay. So there, that looks right. Okay. Here we go. It's a graph. I know it's right. There's a graph. So there's a lot of arm waving that the reason we have an affordability problem in Toronto is because we don't have enough supply. And if we would just build more supply, we could solve this problem. The prices would come down. Unfortunately, that's not the case. We are building a lot of supply in the city. We're just not building the right supply, and that is the challenge. This graph shows the condos that are currently under development, that are in the pipeline, are being built and will come online over the next 5 years. We're at an all-time high. That's 105,000 condo units in the pipeline. It's the highest it's ever been. The problem is that they're not the right supply, and I'll get to that in a second. Oh, first of all, I should point out that 94% of these condo units are sold before the shovel even hits the ground. And 50% of those are to condo investors. That's for the whole GTA, and what I've been told is that when it comes to Toronto, that's about close to 100%. So if we just wave our arms up in the air and say we need more supply, and we build more supply for investors and not end users, we're not getting ahead of the game. I'm sorry, I keep doing that. So just the arrow. I got it. Okay, great.
This is why I never have slides. I'm impressed to hell that you could even make it work. Good for you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about changing demographics. We know that millennials, we're always talking about millennials. After seniors, they're the largest age cohort in the region. And over the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to be somewhere between mid-30s and mid-40s, and they're going to be looking to upsize. So let's call them the upsizers. That if they've managed to get out of their parents' basements, they're going to be looking for a family-friendly home, maybe a 2-bedroom condo or some other type of family-friendly housing.
There's smiles in the front row there. Is that way beyond even the thought? Who wants to upsize? Who wants to own a place that doesn't currently? Quick show of hands. People would like to be able to own. And who's a renter right now? And who's an owner right now? And who bought 10 years ago or more? Because you won the lottery.
Yeah, exactly. And then how many millennials are going to be, already own and want to upsize? Are there any in this room? Okay.
Upsizing? Okay.
Yeah, because that's what's going to be happening. This demographic shows that even though the 1-bedrooms in the studios might have worked for millennials in the last decade and the decade to come, they're going to be looking for, at least a second room.
A double bed, perhaps not a single.
It's too much to ask, Jane. And then come the seniors. We're going to see over 500,000 new seniors, not new seniors, they're the same ones, they're just going to be seniors, added to the Greater Toronto Area over the next 5 to 10 years. And they are by far the biggest demographic. And even though we hear that those seniors are never going to leave their homes or carry me out on a stretcher, I'm not getting out of my house, even if 10 to 20% of them want to downsize, the issue is that they're going to want to downsize to the same typology as the upsizers. They want to stay in their neighborhoods. They want at least a condo with 2 bedrooms. They have a lot of stuff. I'm not taking my mom's dining room suite.
You need the Swedish death cleaning treatment.
And so we're going to have the upsizers and the downsizers looking for the same type of missing middle housing. And the question is, do you think we're building that?
Yeah, 0%, yeah.
Yeah, so what we did was we studied every single condo unit in the region that is coming down the pipe and will be completed over the next 5 years. So that's around the same time that we're seeing that demographic shift. What we're finding is that we're building tall and we're building small. So over the next 5 years, 60% of the condo units that are coming down the pipeline are going to be one bedrooms or studios. Compare that to the 1990s when almost 70% of apartments being built had 2 or more bedrooms. And it's not just the size or the number of bedrooms, it's also the scale. So in the Greater Toronto area, 80% of the condo units will be in buildings that are 20 stories or higher. In the 416, 50% will be in buildings over 36 stories. And when you look at the missing middle, like walk-ups or stacked townhouses or low mid-rises, that's only about 3% of what's being built. And that's for the whole GTA. For Toronto, it's even less. It's about 1%. And then if you look at mid-rise, if you look at mid-rise from 5 to 8 stories, say, that's about 7% for the whole region. So we're not building the type of housing. Oh, I'm missing a slide. Where's that missing middle slide?
Oh, it's missing.
Oh, dear.
AWOL.
Oh, I'm just going to have to describe it to you. It was a great illustration. So missing middle isn't just a typology. Missing middle is also a location. So if you imagine small one-bedroom condos in high-rises in our urban centers or detached houses far in the suburban frontier where you have to drive to qualify for a mortgage, that's essentially the majority of what is being built. And if you look at what's coming down the pipeline, that's going to continue to be built. And that building more of that and all that arm waving and saying, we need to be building, you need to relax some of the red tape so that we can build more tall condos that for investors. That's not going to help us. And even saying we need to open up more of our farmers' fields or even open up the green belt. That's not going to help us either. What's missing is the type of housing which is family friendly. It may be a mid-rise, it may be a stacked townhouse, but it's in our urban centers, it's close to schools, it's close to jobs, it's close to transit, and it's close to services. And that's the stuff we're not building. And if we keep building the wrong supply, we're going to make that stuff even more expensive.
So just to get clear, Cherise, you know, just walking around, people see those like on St. Clair or even in Rosedale, these apartments that are about 4 stories high, and they are a lot in the 50s, 30s, 40s. Is that a missing middle sort of housing too? I mean, a modern version of it?
It's there are, but the thing
it's
is,
not just mid-rises on the avenues, right?
It's not mid-rises on the avenues. It's in infills, like in beer store parking lots. You'll see they're building some of that stacked townhouses. They're about 4 stories. We're also seeing row houses and...
Do people have that in their mind,
Yeah.
these kinds of buildings in their neighborhoods, these kind of like small apartment buildings? You can picture them, like, and you look at them and you go, how did that ever get built? Like you go by, it looks so cool, and I want to buy one like we all do with our friends, as we're going to call it the feminarium, and we're going to retire there. We're going to keep a nice unit for someone to take care of us, but 6 units or something, right? They look fantastic, but you figure they could never get built now because they won't even let daycares get built in neighborhoods in Toronto, right? What are the chances you get a 6-plex, 3-story or 4-story built? It seems like, so this is the kind of more density that would help fill that gap, yeah?
And we'll get into a lot of the challenges later, I'm sure. But right now, it's so expensive because the land costs. It's a lot more cost effective for a developer to build 37 stories than 7. Often the land and many of the other costs, approval process, are the same.
All right, excellent. Okay, Stephanie. Thank you, Cherise. Stephanie, I know you're going to solve it all for us. West Coast, that so creative and thoughtful and dreamy out there. They've got the solutions we're all looking for. And I know that actually there are some really interesting things going on out there, because some of the work I'm doing with nonprofit housing here, we're looking to Vancouver because they are breaking the trail in important ways. So, Stephanie, just a few words about Stephanie here. Stephanie is a housing specialist focused on increasing diversity and equity through housing practices. Now, she cut her teeth working in the private real estate sector for years and moved on to BC Housing, where Stephanie helped deliver partnerships with municipalities, with First Nations, and nonprofits. Stephanie Allen is now the Vice President of Project Planning and Partnerships Division of Catalyst Community Development Society in Vancouver. But in a way, the Twitter bio sums it up best with the Jay-Z quote that reads, "I do this for the culture to let them know industry is shady and it needs to be taken over." That's auspicious. So kick it off, Stephanie.
Thank you very much. I didn't know I'd be quoted by quoting Jay-Z, but hey, you know, you got to use what you got to use.
It's a good mission objective.
Exactly. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I wish I were able to take notes, but I'm grateful this is being recorded. You know, thank you for inviting Catalyst to the conversation. Catalyst was formed to help answer the questions that we're all asking today. Where will we all live in the city? Besides weather, which we don't have in common, Vancouver has a lot in common with Toronto and New York. And one of the more pressing issues is that we're both highly attractive places for global capital investment. And that reality, combined with other pressures, are causing conditions where more of us are unable to find affordable housing suitable to our family composition, our physical needs, in locations close to our jobs, and the services on which we rely. Presently in Vancouver, a single family home in the metro region is about $1.6 million. And in the city of Vancouver proper, a single family home is about $3 million. New condos in the downtown core have climbed approximately to about $2,000 per square foot, which makes about a one-bedroom apartment hovering around $1 million new. When we contrast that with what's happening with minimum wages, the BC government's moving up to $12.65 an hour as of June 1st. But if a person's working full-time and paying 30% as we've heard, of their gross income on rent, that affords them about $632 per month to put towards housing. Now, in a city where our March statistics said that studio apartments are about $16.24 per month to rent, people making minimum wage can no longer live in our city. And so it starts to ask the question, what kind of city are we going to have? Catalyst is a not-for-profit real estate developer. And maybe I should say that again. Catalyst is a not-for-profit real estate developer. It's something that we don't have a lot of in Canada, but we're starting to see a trend towards that. We formed to focus on developing affordable places for people to live in, to work in, to play, and for community service providers to serve communities from. It's an important part of cities, as we know. As we seek to answer that question about the future of affordable housing, you know, we see the conversation can get very swept up in trends, and we can also see that the folks that are stuck sometimes in government programs and waiting for government funding. But as, you know, my other panelists have spoken to today, it's important to look at creativity and ingenuity, and in Canada especially, where we don't have some of those robust programs that you see in New York and the United States. And so what Catalyst has done is we've gone back to community for us for that answer. And so for us, the future of affordable housing looks like this. This is HANNELORE GERLACH, and she is 83 years old. She is the chair of the OAKRIDGE Lutheran Church Building Committee. And in her late 70s, together with her congregation, they embarked on an audacious dream to hold on to their land in a neighborhood that was swiftly being swallowed up by speculative real estate development and land assemblies. She is a visionary, she's a fighter, and she's really the definition of what community-focused real estate can look like. The original OAKRIDGE Lutheran Church, as pictured here, was built 62 years ago. They, at the time, HANNELORE told me, were at the outskirts of Vancouver. As longtime land stewards, they really wanted to use their land, first of all, to deliver more of what they were trying to do as community supports, and also to deliver their mission. Developers knocked on their door a lot. They wanted to buy that building from them and turn that site into market condos. But they were committed to holding on to their land and to finding a way that their land can actually be used to deliver their mission. When Catalyst teamed up, our first phase of our process on looking at that asset did not start with assessing what the zoning potential could be or what the land value was. We really started with understanding that organization's mission. What were they trying to accomplish as a group? When we went through that, we realized that there was a lot of literacy and support that was necessary for that group to understand the complexities, but we built a process that took them incrementally through so that they could make decisions that were constantly supporting what they were trying to accomplish as community servers. We formed a joint venture partnership, and with Catalyst as the expert in real estate development and with the OAKRIDGE Lutheran Church's land, we have now under construction what you see in the lower picture. It is a 6-story mixed-use building. On the ground level, there will be retail. On the second story, the church will have their congregation space, which will also be used 24/7 by the community at low cost or nominal rates for rent. And above it will be 46 below market rental homes, where the studios will start at about $1,000 per month and 2 bedrooms about $1,300 per month. When the OAKRIDGE Lutheran Church put their land into this venture, it represented their equity investment in the project. So for that equity investment, they get a percentage share of the residential units. They get their new space for free and debt-free, and it's theirs to own through an airspace parcel. And they also have partnered with us as owners of the retail space on the ground level. What that represents to them as an owner is an annual income of around $100,000 that they will have in perpetuity from that investment. That's going to allow this church group to continue to support the community. That's their primary goal. So for Catalyst, as you look at that example, what it demonstrates is that we partner with landowners who are trying to serve a mission in their communities. And they see affordable housing as a priority for their organizations. These can include churches, neighborhood houses, service providers, or community clubs, such as the Legions, health clinics. There's also not-for-profit housing operators, often municipal governments in the Lower Mainland and BC will put their land in to develop affordable housing. These properties usually have structures that are nearing end of life, or there is a major need to redevelop because the organizations are not able to financially hold on to their assets. And what they really need is a revenue stream to support the kind of work they're doing. What Catalyst brings to is our own mission, which is to deliver affordable spaces in cities. We bring expertise. All of the folks in our organization have either formerly worked as market real estate developers or that and government. And we partner with social impact investors, which is a very important part of what we do. And these are private organizations or individuals who have decided to put money into projects at a capped return. So they reduce the amount of expected investment return for these developments because they too are committed to delivering affordability. So the formula that we have, which are these community-led organizations and a vision to do something important in community with the land contribution, a not-for-profit developer with social impact investors, we're able to deliver affordable rental homes that range between 20 to 40% below market. And those homes are secured in perpetuity. Now, the core to what HANNELORE demonstrates is that it requires community partners who are committed to seeing a mission and the goals align. It's really these partnerships that make it affordable and make it affordable in perpetuity. what we know is that the affordability crisis is starting to swallow up more of us. It's hurt racialized and marginalized communities in the inner city for a very long time. And now those of us that could have afforded market housing are also being taken up in this wave. So instead of the city being a welcoming place for all, low-income communities are being displaced from the urban areas that they have long called home, and middle-income earners are starting to feel the hopelessness once felt only by those who were really struggling at the poverty line. You know, it's interesting, in Vancouver, because of this affordability crisis, the rippling effects are really reaching out. We're currently working with a community health center that has owned their land for about 40 years, and they have a community health clinic on that land, and they're a not-for-profit organization. They need a new clinic space, and they're trying to explore if they can also build housing on the redevelopment. When we met with them, they told us that doctors in Vancouver are closing up their offices because they can no longer afford their leases. So to think about the fact that doctors are leaving our city is quite a critical impact on the infrastructure and the ability for people to stay in the city and have the services that they rely on. It's also true that it's hitting cultural groups. Recently, a cultural facility is transforming its ownership from manufacturing to retail. They have a lot of artists and craftspeople and musicians that use that space. 80 of those people are now going to be displaced by the closure. So these are the kinds of situations we're looking at. So how do our developments address and create those spaces? And it's through these partnerships that we're doing it, that we can really deliver. Now, in BC, we're fortunate that the BC government does provide granting dollars to create affordable housing. They provide low-cost financing as well. But the challenge has been that those programs are hit and miss. They are here and then they're gone. The political climate changes and then affordable housing funds do dry up. So Catalyst's model is really trying to harness social purpose investors. So for those days when the provincial government perhaps or the federal government is not at the table, we can still deliver affordable housing. Thanks.
It is exciting.
So it's really about, you know, how we put that formula together. And the big thing is that it becomes a long-term land stewardship investment in perpetuity. We help organizations to improve their affordability over time. As we always say, the first day is our most expensive day of operating housing, but as the mortgage is paid off, we're able to actually reduce rents over time. So we're not actually with the market always trying to keep pace, but we actually can devote some of those resources to keeping the rents low or becoming more affordable for people, for example, living on minimum wage or really struggling to access housing on social assistance. We also protect community assets from speculation. This is, there's an important place for market development, but it's not every place. And we feel like these community and public assets can actually serve a greater good if they remain in community hands. And then finally, we get to reinvest that revenue. Our partners have the revenue to provide community services. A lot of churches offer a lot of programs out of their spaces. They have Alcoholic Anonymous, childcare, there's all kinds of support services that happen in churches. Now they're actually able to access funds that they can continue to do that work. And then for Catalyst, we have a financial stream that allows us to go out and build more affordable housing. And our big dream is one day to buy land at market. That would be something. Mm-hmm. So part of our impact, just to kind of review what it is we're able to accomplish, since starting about 4 years ago, we have 10 projects completed or in development, which represents about 709, well not about, exactly, we counted, 709 below market homes, which can house approximately 1,300 people based on the unit mix. Family housing is an important part of what we do, and we include usually 2 bedrooms and 3 bedroom units in all of what we do. Oops, I'm missing a slide too. And so the final slide was going to say the other part of our impact is that we have 78,000 square feet of commercial space in our mixed use developments that can be used either for commercial, straight up market commercial occupants or not-for-profit community groups. We try to prioritize not-for-profit groups because they typically can't access space in the market. And we have about 504,000 square feet of residential space in those developments. Now, what's really exciting, and we added this up before I came out here, is that with what we've done annually, what our projects represent is a $6.43 million reduction in what our rents would be from market to non-market every year that we're helping people keep in their households to take care of the very important things they need to do in their own lives. So 6.43 million out of those 10 projects as a discount. We have a lot in the pipeline as well, which is the majority of my work. We have 13 projects in the feasibility stage, and a lot of people are catching on to our model and quite interested. And one of the big things that we hope to do as an organization, because we know we'll not be able to be everywhere in Canada, but we really want to develop a toolbox so that communities can do this for themselves. We really feel strongly that, you know, I visited groups such as the Parkdale Land Trust since I've been here, and I can see there's a lot of people really committed to doing great things in their own communities. And so the ways that we can all support each other in accomplishing affordable housing is a win for us. So in closing, we would just encourage all of you, I would encourage all of you from your professional, your academic, and your practitioner backgrounds and capacities to keep contributing to your communities, to really help community groups keep their assets in their own hands, and to work with them at the seat. You know, working with HANNELORE has been an inspiration for all of us. Her determination and her drive. She actually won a case at the Supreme Court of BC to remove a restrictive covenant from their lands in order to provide affordable housing. So those are the kinds of people, if we stick really close with them, will really start to turn the tide.
Awesome. Thank you. So I wonder if we could start by getting a sense. I mean, Stephanie and Cherise, you've heard how it works in New York. There seems to be a lot of perks or a lot of support. But just get your sense. When Rafael says this is how we get it done in New York, what stood out for you and what is really different about the context you're working in?
Well, I think what stood out for me is that, you know, we have some municipalities in BC that vet land in, so that's similar, and we're glad to be on track for that. But what really strikes me is the commitment to making sure that affordable housing is constantly in the pipeline and that they're not just nice to haves when there's political winds that are blowing in that direction. Those commitments to making sure that the city owns, holds, protects, and promotes the creation of affordable housing, I think there's something that we can gain from in a lot of our communities in BC and probably in Canada.
Cherise? What stood out for you?
I think what stands out for me for both of them is the fact that this has to happen, that these incredible individuals, and there's also options for homes in Toronto you're probably familiar with, that it's falling to the nonprofit sector, and thank goodness they exist, to make this happen. And it's interesting because when we used to talk about affordable housing, people thought it meant social housing or subsidized housing. And now we talk about housing affordability because it means everybody. And it means, you know, everyone from the middle class to the working class to the barista, from the student to the professor. People can't afford to live in these cities where they grew up or where they decided to work, where they work. They can't. I have friends in Vancouver who can't live there anymore and they have to leave their jobs. So it strikes me that it comes down to these not-for-profit entities or even municipally driven entities that are working on carving out creative solutions and putting their and giving land away for $1 when there should be, I would hope that there would be these bigger interventions at the policy level to ensure that we're building homes for the end users, not for investors. I think that's one place to start. And if we use that as our lens, because I could go on and on about what are some of the bigger interventions, but I think that we, you know, it's this big debate. Are homes a investment asset, a stock asset, or are they homes?
Rafael, I want to ask you, you've had the benefit of getting land for free or for $1. Doesn't happen a lot, correct, Leslie, Mark? Developers don't usually get $1 for land, correct? That's very unusual. Depends on what they promise to do. So it's happened occasionally in Toronto? These guys know a little bit about that. But let's say it's a rarity, very rare, compared to what we're hearing about in New York, which was the result of a major meltdown in the 70s, but they had a lot of land and they gave it away. So in the absence of getting free land in Toronto, Rafael, what we're hearing about is maybe there's a lot of churches and faith groups and Masonic temples and Legion halls that are going relatively underutilized, let's say. Has anyone seen one of those in their neighborhood lately? Little crumbling brickwork, perhaps, to go with it. And not as many people showing up on Sunday, although the mission, the social mission, remains vital for the people who are there. Rafael, so you're hearing that maybe this is our Canadian solution. We'll just get those faith groups to sit down with us and cut us a good deal. Has New York tried that before? Probably. What do you think? Compare and contrast those approaches.
So I think yeah, the answer is yes, and I think it can be a component, an important component of an overall strategy. You know, I think the real question, as I listened today, is it's a question of scale. It's a question of how do you take what Stephanie is doing and take it to a scale where instead of 709 homes, it's 7,000 homes, and it's not just happening with Catalyst, but it's happening across multiple different places. And I think that's really the difference that New York has achieved. We've been able to achieve scale. Now, there are a lot. If we were in a setting like this in New York, there would be lots of people who wouldn't agree with some of the ways in which we've gone about achieving scale. So I don't want to paint this rosy picture that everything that we're doing in New York everybody loves and thinks it's just the greatest thing ever, because that's never true.
You mean your town halls aren't like kumbaya all the time?
Particularly in New York. No, in fact, I've been chased out of a number of town halls in New York in my day. But when you step back from it and you think about, okay, well, what has happened, and that is that the new housing marketplace plan in the Bloomberg administration provided affordable homes for 500,000 New Yorkers. And that was a plan that was built on the successes of Mayor Koch's original plan to rebuild New York, and has been then taken on now in the new administration, or not so new anymore, in New York. And so part of it is that scale of investment has really taken hold in the fabric of New York. It's become a part of how we think about what government should be doing. And it's not working against private interest. It's trying to work with private interests and use government's tools to incentivize private interests to create affordable housing. And so when I think about the things that we hear about, that we've heard about tonight in Toronto, I think about scale. How do you then try to replicate those models to achieve scale that a city the size of Toronto is going to need?
Rafael, I think you're a few steps ahead of us here in Toronto. I think we need some pilots, some kind of base hits still. We're unfortunately not, I don't think, at that place of big-time scale-up, but correct me if I'm wrong, Stephanie, you've got 10 projects in motion or done. Is scale-up viable? Is it going to happen? What stands in the way of scale-up?
We're really interested in scale, and we know that that's going to allow us to really do more. And one of the things that Catalyst is involved on the conversation level at all levels of government is how can government support this nonprofit development sector so that we can achieve these economies of scale. And I mean, we've been able to do so much in a pretty quick period of time because we had supportive partners from a credit union helping us get started up and seeding us with money. But the model right now for a lot of the programs with not-for-profit housing providers, my boss likes to say, is cap in hand, and it's go to the government, and then if you don't have government money, you stop and you wait until the government money shows up. But if we can get social impact investors really interested in affordable housing, if we can get more not-for-profit real estate developers going at this and getting actually some support from the layers of government, we can see something that would actually have a major tide change, and we would start to have some impact in our cities where we're not just going and stopping and waiting. I think that's one of the critical challenges in BC in the not-for-profit sector, is that there's funding today and then there's not tomorrow.
So I have to ask you the National Housing Strategy question, kind of pretty much walking in that direction. Is that going to help you? Is it going to open those doors and make those partnerships and deals possible? It's going to help scale it up.
I think that's what I'm hearing. You know, I think the details are coming out, but it's the first time we've had a national housing strategy in a long time. I think CMHC has taken a feedback from the not-for-profit sector that said, we need these programs to work in these ways. It sounds like they want to do a lot more to help urban development, because I think the old CMHC model of, row townhouses in the suburbs or whatever is
small and sprawl.
Right? It's not really feasible anymore. So they're going to allow not-for-profits to add ground floor retail so that it can fit into the urban scale. So we're hearing some good things, and I'll know more, I think, when I go to Ottawa tomorrow. But we're really encouraged that at least
everyone follow you on Twitter.
Exactly.
You got a little update.
But at least what they've been doing, which has been really great, is providing very low-cost financing, and that low-cost financing, it immediately translates into affordability. It's better than you can get at banks. It's better than you can get anywhere in this country. So those savings, and we're in a system, we're in a climate of climbing interest rates, and that's having an impact on affordability every time we do a pro forma and we're ticking it up a point or a percent, a part of a point. We are feeling that impact in the affordability. So it's encouraging, and we're really looking forward to having more details on it.
Rafael?
So the one thing that it made me think of, and it's, it is certainly one of the more controversial aspects of New York's model, and that is, New York has gotten comfortable with organizations like Catalyst, along with for-profit development companies making money building affordable housing, and realizing that the incentives that government provides is creating a system that is sustainable because people want to keep doing it because it's a venture that generates
returns.
Revenue and has returns for them. And so I don't know how you support your sort of the cost of your organization. I know in my case as a not-for-profit organization, everything we do makes enough money that we can keep our lights on. We don't raise grant money. We don't go to philanthropic sources to help support our operation. And there are a number of nonprofits around New York that have been able to develop those kinds of models because the system works
so let's
as
get
a
a
way
sense
to
of
generate profitability.
How do you do the pro forma then? How do you balance the budgets then? If you're at least keeping your head above water, if not, in fact, making return on investment. What is different about how you structure your rental rates that allow developers to come out ahead, or investors?
Well, obviously, to the extent that it's city-owned land. Now, we do lots of development
Or
on private
free.
land too, right? So not every project that we do in New York is on city-owned land. I don't want to overplay that. But clearly, if it's a city-owned piece of land, free land is...
That's going to help.
It's going to help. To your point, the subsidized loans that the city provides drops the cost of the mortgage capital that provides the long-term debt. So
Financing.
that's a very similar thing to what Stephanie talked about. And then the last piece of it is property tax abatements. so that you're lowering the overall cost of long-term operation of the units.
But there's also market rate, right? How you define market rate. So let's say I earn $300,000 a year. Yeah, that's me. How much, like, I want to live in one of these buildings that you're building, and there's some market rate in it. Like, you know, just to describe it, I think that it's quite different the way we have it here in Toronto, is that there is a cap.
Yep. So again, I'm also talking.
The developer can make more money on the market rate rentals, I believe, right?
Yes. So I'm also talking rental, right? So I'm 100%. What I'm talking about is rental housing. So in New York, we do a lot of mixed income development. So we do developments where 50% of the units are pure market rate. And that rent is set at whatever the market will bear for the unit size that is being developed. 30% of the units will be, you know, call it, you know, the 40 moderate income. Maybe it's, you know, 20% or 30% below market. And then the balance of the units, 20% of the units, will be for a low and very low income households.
So in the same building, and I should note the same elevators, you have people on the same floors. Yeah. You have someone who's spending
all over the city, everywhere.
All mixed incomes in the same building, same floor.
It's how we live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask
everywhere.
a question about that? Because the challenge in Vancouver has been that the not-for-profit operators who end up getting the, let's say, the discounted non-market units, they don't want to pay the same overhead as the condo units because the condo finishings are nicer. The hallway lights are nicer, the tile is nicer, and the not-for-profit sector has said, we want our units segregated, which ends up having the pour door, and we, you know, which is that term, but we want our units segregated because we want our operating budgets to not be shared with a strata corporation of homeowners who we will lose every battle to, and we can't keep up with them financially. So how does it work in the types of developments you're talking about?
Yeah, so that's, so we have that exact issue in developments that are condo developments where we're trying to get affordability in a condo development. It's one of the biggest challenges with trying to do that in a condo structure. What I'm talking about is 100% rental housing. It's owned by an operator, and so the finishes are all the same. Every apartment looks the same for the most part. There may be some slight variations, but for the most part, the finishes are the same, everything's the same, and the only thing different is what you're paying for rent versus what I'm paying for rent. They have access to all the same amenities. They have all the same entrance, the same elevators. In fact, this was actually a really big issue in New York about 3-4 years ago, where a developer tried to build a mixed income building that was partially sponsored by the city, and their plans that they went public with had a separate entrance and a completely separate building in a quote-unquote pour door. And it became a very big rallying cry for lots of people in New York because it's just not how we live. We have been doing this kind of mixed income development in New York for decades. And it's become sort of second nature to most New Yorkers.
When I was living in the Queen West Triangle, with Active 18, this local organization that was sort of calling for better design. I mean, we could deal with the density, you know, if we got things in return for the community. It was unique in that way. But the Artscape lofts that went into one of the developments were for artists, and it was insisted by the developer that the artists have a separate entrance. The artists could not possibly mix with the other population in the condo dwellers. And of course, most people were buying property in that area because they want to be around the artists. You know, who were they? They were then displacing. But it just gets crazy. Yeah.
I mean, one thing I would just add is there have been instances in New York where there have been condos and rentals built in essentially the same building. So you might have a 40-story building, and you would have, you know, floors, you know, 2 through, you know, 20 is a rental building, and the rest is condo, and the rental building is mixed income in and of itself. In those kind of situations, you will find separate entrances for the rental building and the condo building. But in a 100% straight rental building, that's not the, everybody has the same exact thing.
I hear about people talking about, well, you know, one way the city can do this by getting land to developers cheap, or nonprofit housing developers, is to do a 99-year lease. Does that ring bells for anyone? I think that was that not the situation in Regent Park, right? Or West Donlands. Okay. So could I ask the two people directly involved in development whether 99-year leases are things that is an attractive instrument to people in development, or are they like people don't want to buy things with a lease on it? Is that going to fly with the people financing the projects, building the projects, or buying the units?
It works for Catalyst because Catalyst does only rental housing.
Yeah.
And so a 99-year lease works really well for us. We can still leverage and borrow against it. And as a matter of fact, we kind of feel like it's good for cities to hold on to their land, actually, because privatization, we're still an independent organization, and we have a great board, and we have a great team, and we hope to stay that way long after we're around. But not-for-profits can change their intentions and can change their direction. So it's one of those ways where governments are providing incentives, but they should hold on to something, I think, to make sure and protect those assets over the long term. Right, yeah. And, you know, so you were talking earlier about what Catalyst's model is. We do deliver all the affordability into the projects. Our pro formas do pay us fees to keep our lights on and pay our team, but we are governed by a Societies Act. So by being governed by the Societies Act, we can't accumulate surplus cash. We don't have that ability. And we have an arm's length reach board. Our board are not like friends of the founder. It's or you know, people that used to work. It's all very arm's length reach, so that people can govern it with the purpose of the organization in mind.
Yeah, I mean, we do the 99-year lease structure in New York, a fair amount. You know, from my opinion, there's pros and cons to it, like anything. At the end of the day, you know, the 99-year lease is not necessarily any cheaper than buying the land. It all depends on how the lease is structured. It all depends on, is it a market, you know, price and then structured as a lease, or is it a subsidized price? In my experience, that's been what's made the difference.
And typically market developers are not interested in the 99-year lease. You won't find condo developers in Vancouver trying to make that happen. The city of Vancouver in those cases actually sell their land at market.
And that's the other thing I was going to say is, in New York anyway, the 99-year lease kind of a structure, or frankly a land trust structure, has proven very complicated in homeownership scenarios, because the owner doesn't own the underlying land, doesn't own it. It has proven to be, it has been done, but it has been a challenging structure for homeownership projects.
Cherise, I want to draw you in here on, like, they're sort of touching on some of the issues around, you know, getting general consensus around issues of housing and affordability, and we're seeing a lot more activity around YIMBYs and NIMBYs in Toronto, and I'm sure this is happening also out in Vancouver. But Cherise, we've had a couple of high-profile incidences in the past few months. There was a mid-rise on the north end of the Annex that had some luxury condos that brought up some problems for some parking for a couple of people. There was a, what's the other one? The child care facility in Cabbagetown seemed to be the beginning of the end for many people. The sound of children's laughter apparently was not heritage. At the same time, you have millennials, younger people, maybe even some of the downsizers sort of connecting the dots and go, but I actually want to still live in my neighborhood and age, or I just want to be able to own a place and not get chased out of my neighborhood every 10 years, who are sort of putting the dots together around housing is a real issue. Like, it's political, it's bringing people out. Can you comment on, you know, what the uptake is around this issue, and where there may be momentum and getting the dollars on the table from the government?
There's a whole bunch of stuff in there. Just on the NIMBY, YIMBY thing, I mean, there's going to be NIMBY everywhere. And I think there are a few cases where people are opposed to even a townhouse going into their neighborhood because it's different than what they're used to seeing. I think it's really important to have the community involved in the whole planning of the neighborhood as well as that particular project. Because the challenges in most neighborhoods, when you go to any of these community engagement nights where the developers come and show their plans, there's 3 things they talk about: height, density, and parking. And the problem is they're always looking up instead of looking down. And looking down is the most important thing. Because in a lot of these neighborhoods where we're seeing mid-rise, for example, we're not seeing a lot of mid-rise go up in the middle of these detached houses. There's no space for it. It's usually going up along our avenues where there might have been an auto body shop or some crappy low-rise commercial space. It's gonna be better than what was there before, but people are just frightful because they think that all development is in the form of towers, and it's just not gonna be that way. That's where a lot of our development has been going into our hero neighborhoods, which is downtown, Yonge and Eglinton, things like that. But most of what we're going to see in terms of housing, I think half of our population in the city of Toronto is going to be housed in mid-rise. So the most important thing is the type of as-of-right zoning that can bring a neighborhood together, a community permit system, so that they'll say, okay, we're going to have this development here. What do you see for the ground level? What would you like? Do you want a Shoppers Drug Mart? Do you want another dentist in the ground floor? And how would you like your public realm to look? Like, would you like to have some community services like a daycare, or do you need, what is it, you know, for heck, they've got a lot of condos where they want places to wash their dogs. So bringing people in at the ground level.
Aim for this guy. Come on. Safe injection
And
site. Let's just do it.
And also,
That's where I want my Section 37.
having the developers think first about the retail, not last. Because the problem is that's an afterthought, and that's why we get such crappy retail, and we get these retail ghettos that just look terrible. So, I mean, that's one thing, is if we find that in the situations where people are brought in, they can imagine how to activate their neighborhood, it changes the conversation.
Do you feel, Chef Stephanie, that this is happening? I mean, Vancouver's got more rental stock. They've done some things better out there, it seems. Like, has the YIMBY sort of influence been effective? Are people advocating for better housing, more affordable housing, and getting more things done?
It's definitely been a rise in Vancouver the last little while. There's these YIMBY movements. They have a lot of value when trained on the right projects. I think there's recently been a temporary modular housing initiative through the City of Vancouver and BC Housing to really put an impact on street homelessness in Vancouver and homeless at risk, which is the numbers are climbing at an exponential rate. And so the initiative allowed for these temporary modular housing developments to be put in on developers' land that are perhaps going to be developed some years in the future. They're very quick to assemble, to get on site, and to get people into housing. But they were going into some more established single-family homes, and the fights have been incredible. There's been violence at some of these public meetings, and people blockading equipment. And so, because they feel like they weren't consulted and they feel like they want to have that say. And so the people that are on the YIMBY side of this have been very effective. There's actually, what was really heartening out of this was a group of high school kids who were being used as, you cannot put people with mental health and addictions, think of the children. And the children came out and said, actually, we welcome these people to our community. They got together, they put together welcome kits. Wow. It has been a really moving thing in Vancouver to see the power of young people who said, actually, we don't agree with our parents, we want this here. Wow. And so, but the other side of the coin is where there are fragile communities and communities of low income and are trying to push back on gentrification pressure. And we saw a major condo development actually get turned down at the development permit board level because the community came out in such strong opposition to it, because it's in Chinatown, a lot of low-income seniors live in that area that can't find housing elsewhere, and it would have put a lot of change in that community that would kind of start to give the nod to speculation that this is a place where you can kind of get these projects built. And that project was turned down. So I think as we look at it, the question I always ask is, where's the equitable outcome? And are we putting first people who are disadvantaged, marginalized, and are in need of housing? Are we putting forward moneyed interests and powerful groups that already have an established kind of fortress? Those are the questions I think we have to ask, and I think it cuts through the NIMBY and the YIMBY argument a lot better.
Yeah, I think we're ready to sort of turn it over to you guys for comments or questions. So we have a couple roving microphones. Here you go. This gentleman here has his hand up right there, fast.
Hi, thank you. My name is Surjit, and I have a question for...
Just to hold the mic a little bit closer.
Sorry?
Just a bit closer. We got to
Hello.
hear you. There you go.
Everybody can hear me? Yeah, okay. I just wanted to ask you, because you mentioned about some challenged community. Have you had any experience with housing persons with disabilities in any of your projects? And secondly, in Vancouver, there is a wave of co-housing projects that I've taken on a small level. Do you see that progressing? So these are the two questions I wanted to ask you.
Sure. So our goal with our developments is that we have at least 5% that are wheelchair accessible. We just are doing a project right now in New Westminster with a community living group. And the ground floor will be accessible units, all of them, and then they're a stacked townhouse style. So it's an important part of what we do is to do between 5 and 10% of accessible housing and to create and to make that affordable. Your other question was about co-housing. So when I worked at BC Housing, this was also something that we looked at. Co-housing, for those who may or may not know, really is about folks living in a bit smaller of their own home, and sharing a more large, generous common space where people have their meals together, they share a lot of the same amenities, and they all kind of commit to taking care of the community. It's like co-op plus a little bit more. It's really a communal style of living. And one of the challenges that we saw was that it requires someone to buy the land and to hold the land while the development process takes place. The other challenge is that people really need to commit to co-housing. Because you're saying that we're going to have dinner together every night, and we're going to have shared responsibilities. And so the process of getting the commitment between kind of strangers into a more family style type of way of living also has some pros and cons, because people kind of go through the process and then they drop off because they think, you know, I'm not getting along with that person over there. Maybe this isn't the right thing for me. So it's getting it off the ground has been challenging, and there's some really great people committed to it, but those two barriers of someone to kind of come forward with the finances to secure the land over a bit of a term that it takes to get the project planned and built, those are some of the challenges I've seen. But where it's been working, and there's a community, I believe, on the Sunshine Coast of BC that has done it, and it seemed people love it who love it.
No, I think this concept has really exploded across Europe, and actually at present there are 200 communities functioning quite well in the United States as well. I'm quite aware of that, and in British Columbia there are about 10, and there are 1 or 2 in development phase in Ontario. But my question goes back to the people that you referred to, the 5 to 10% that is given over to people with disabilities. How are they assimilated or intentionally engaged in the communities that they live?
Well, Catalyst actually has a role and an intention to make sure that we develop places that promote social cohesion and positive social dynamics. So when we design buildings, one of our key goals is that we plan amenity spaces where there's high visibility, so closer to lobbies and closer to places where people can commune and gather. Another thing is we're piloting a social activation and social engagement person that would really work on connecting both the people that live in our community with each other, and then connecting people to the greater community. And that would be available for all tenants, because our goal is to really have a well-integrated and socially positive place for people to live. And so we're really trying to set that intention. We've also worked with groups, again, like I said, community living groups. One of them is a Semiyamu House Society. They house and provide services for adults with developmental disabilities. And their intention in all of their developments is that their developments are a mix. So it's not just folks living who have a developmental disabilities, but also low-income or non-market renters. And the whole goal is to make sure that people feel a part of community. So it's all of the work we do and the partners that we work with have that as a specific intention.
I think Mark Guslett's here, gentleman who's worked in some housing projects in his time. Mark, you have a comment or question?
I do have a question. Hi. It's a kind of a tough one because
Hold the mic closer.
I've been to, like many people in this room, to a lot of evenings like this. We've been trying to tackle affordability for a long time.
Can you hear him at the back?
In Canada, and
we're going to tackle your volume level first.
Can you now? Is that working?
That's good.
Okay. So, and over the years, you know, we, through various mechanisms, government programs, etc., we've actually done a lot of the things that you've all been talking about. We had a period in Canada's history when we had mixed income housing. We had thousands and thousands of units of co-ops built across the country under programs that at that time were popular. And in them, we had market units, and we had moderate units, and we had
yeah.
other kinds of units.
Good. It's important that you be heard.
Anyways, so we did that. And over the years, we've tried inclusionary zoning, and we've tried 1,000,001 mechanisms. Many of them used successfully, some of them less so. Some of them certainly have been working in the United States. Your tax system is dramatically different than ours, so some of them would work here, some of them wouldn't work here. But we've been doing this, and we've been talking about it, and generally the answers and the discussion is pretty much the same. We have a problem. We have, you know, prices are going up, and people can't afford to live in cities, and homelessness is increasing, and yeah. That's a long time, and there's lots of people have been putting their heads towards that, and we're still sitting and having these meetings. So my question to you is, trying to go outside of the type of discussion that makes perfect sense to have, because the nuts and bolts are things that we have to learn about. But I just wonder, thinking outside of that particular box, if you had to think about a big move. I mean, rather than focusing on the nuts and bolts for a moment, is there a big move? Is there something that if we really, everybody here and everybody in meetings like this across Canada, put their minds to, we could make a dramatic shift rather than an incremental one?
I really like the title, A Big Move, because it reminds me of what we used to call our regional transit plan. Remember when it was called the Big Move? Okay, so we're investing $32 billion in a regional transit plan. $16 billion of that is being invested in upgrading the GO network to turn it into something called Regional Express Rail. Those stations are mostly parking lots. We have an incredible once-in-a-generation opportunity to transform those GO parking lots into complete communities. They are an incredible public asset. They're publicly owned. The province, or the Metrolinx, whoever that agency would be, that public agency, can come to the table with very valuable land and another very valuable asset, which is a regional express rail. And then say, wow, we could develop this. We could do whatever we want on here. We can make it a complete community. We could do mixed income, mixed use. We could do rental. We could do market. We could do penthouses. We could do everything. We could install some excellent public realm and some parks even. Save some space for parks. On every regional express rail. You'll just stop and do that. Anyway, but don't sell it for $1, and I just want to finish that point, is that joint developments are starting to happen throughout the world in many cities. We just saw in Montreal last week, one of their major transit hubs, the transit agency just partnered with the city and with a developer to build a mixed neighborhood with condos, with rentals, with some affordable housing, and some retail, a bunch of other things. So the point is that the public should hold on to their land, partner, they each put the skin in the game, and then guess what? Instead of the province getting a one-time development charge or waiting for property taxes, they can share in the profits. They share in the rents. They share in the sales from the condos. That's long-term. That is money that can be reinvested in transit and more affordable housing. In fact, Hong Kong and Singapore, their transit agencies are first and foremost real estate developers. And they use all of that money that they develop to build their transit and then a whole bunch of other things.
I want to make sure we get to a bunch more questions. Stephanie.
I'll go fast. From Newfoundland to Victoria to Inuvik, government should not divest of another acre of land, not at any level, until we investigate what the need assessment is in that community and if it can be used for affordable housing or a part of it for, not another acre. Not at any level can we make sure that we provide for what our community needs, community spaces.
And could I suggest that if someone has a big move to consider that Sidewalk should look at, that we should think about, to tweet it. You can just call it my big move would be this. We will harvest that data and feed it into this conversation. It'll be amazing. Rafael, do you have 3 words to add to a big ask? Because you're not from here, but if you could have done something differently, what would a big ask look like from you? Just quickly. Something that would be ambitious, but you wish could happen.
For me, the big challenge that we haven't ever addressed in New York is that no matter all of these great big things that we do, our city continues to get less affordable. And part of the reason for that is that incomes are not rising at the same rate as real estate. And so, to me, the big idea that I keep coming back to for New York is we need to do more to supplement people's ability to rent on the market. And so the demand side, if you will, of the equation is really important and is not something that we've ever really done. And figuring out a way to get more rental assistance into people's hands so that they have the ability to rent on the private market.
Okay. Question over here.
Hi, I'm curious to know about, I guess, any cases or shifts that have helped inform sustainability in terms of supply chain, the material and the tissue that, I guess, helps develop these, or that hold these developments together, just anything in terms of the material being used and the resources that go into these developments.
Like
Do you
a
mean
toolkit
from
sort
a
of thing?
like
how
building
to
sustainability point
Yeah,
of
in
view?
terms of the
Energy efficiency and that
the material, like in terms of the supply chain and production that goes into it.
I mean, in BC, modular housing is being used a lot, and they're coming out of the factories meeting passive house requirements or other sustainability targets. So that's one way that we're seeing the supply chain change and be enhanced for housing development. The City of Vancouver has one of the most rigorous building codes in Canada, with very high sustainability targets, moving towards passive house now. It was LEED for a long time, and it's moving towards passive house. So, and they also have district energy utilities that they want developments to connect to, and other goals. So the City of Vancouver and government in general in BC really pushes the sustainability envelope, and government takes a strong lead in that in British Columbia, which has been very helpful for the private sector, because a lot of these things get tested first, and then when they come down in price, the market can kind of take them up. So that's been a really positive thing in BC.
Just want to move the mic around, get a few more questions. Yep.
Thanks very much for this opportunity. I have about 150 questions for Rafael, but I'm not going to be able to ask them.
Just tell everyone who you are.
I'm Cindy Wilkie.
Former winner of the Jane Jacobs Award, just thought I'd plug that in. Does amazing work and advocacy for her neighborhood and waterfront, so thanks for coming here, Cindy.
Yes, Waterfront for All, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have been involved in trying to develop affordable housing, and I was part of the Waterfront Toronto Affordable Housing Task Force a number of years ago that looked at, basically got down to pro formas to try and figure out how to build it here, where land is free and serviced here in the waterfront precincts, but still even with that and with city incentives, it's not affordable until extra money comes in. So, Rafael, I was just wondering, you gave us 4 strategies which included all of those things and money coming in. Is there any magic strategy in New York that allows affordability to happen when there aren't massive amounts of actual cash coming in addition to land and the tax abatements and the zoning?
And the market rate.
Yeah.
In the absence of the magic thing, how do you make the magic thing happen?
I wish there was a magic button, but there isn't. There are examples where we've been able to create affordable units just from the sheer power of the market rate rental income that can come in, so that the city didn't have to put up all of the extra. Yeah, so that, if you can get $5,000 a month on, your apartments, there's enough power in that income stream that the city can require some percentage of the units to be done, and there's no dollars that come in from the city in those instances. The problem with that gets back to my previous comment, which is that can happen in some places, but it can't happen in most places in New York City. And so if you're trying to get to scale, if you're trying to produce a significant number of units to help a significant number of people, those kinds of things haven't proven to be replicable in lots of neighborhoods across the city. And so that's where this four-pronged approach has proven to really be the magic. And the only magic to that is the tax base of the city of New York is like none other, and we have a lot of ability to pay for stuff that that makes it possible for us to do that.
If you go to church, you might want to start a committee at your church to look into how your mission may be renewed by thinking of housing or something. Or the Legion, yes. We'll come right back there. There's one more question here, then we'll come over to that section.
So Rafael, I'm really interested in the fact that you tried to maintain economic incentives for developers while doing affordable housing. And the reason it works, it seems to me, is because of the density that you can get on the site. So I'm wondering, giving Cherise's push for mid-rise housing, if you've ever seen like a model or an economically viable model that also produces affordable housing with mid-rise houses.
Great question.
It's a great question. The answer is yes. In fact, most of the affordable housing that we create in New York is in exactly that mid-rise kind of development. The project that I showed you here happened to be a large-scale development, a high-rise development, but most of the construction that we do for affordable housing is between 6 and, call it, 12 stories. And that is the prototypical affordable development. And that model works, and part of the reason why the model works is actually it costs a lot more to build 40 stories. The actual construction of that unit and what you have to put into it, the engineering associated with it, whereas 6 to 12 stories, you know, we do, not to get too technical, but you can do poured concrete, block and plank construction, and you can get the cost of that down to a level that is very efficient for the creation of affordable housing. So most of what we do is exactly that kind of infill, sort of medium density development.
That's because the land costs are taken out of the equation.
No, not always. That's the point. I don't want to overemphasize that. We are often paying market for land in New York. In cases where government owns the land cost comes out of the equation, but the government doesn't own that much land anymore.
I just wanted to point out that Options for Homes in Toronto is mainly building mid-rise.
Hi. Investors have been responsible for about 50% of all new supply. Oh.
Can't hear you. Hold the microphone really close.
Okay. So investors have been responsible for about 50% of the new supply, right? When it comes to new housing, you know, supply is important, but also how do you get affordable supply onto the market? And so it sounds like the private sector is not really the one who is able to provide that, right? You need nonprofit people and associations involved in providing the affordable housing, and maybe even co-op models or other things like that, like people who have a public interest of providing affordable housing. So I'm wondering, for Toronto specifically, how do you encourage more people to kind of collaborate together and provide you know, affordable housing? So either by partnering with, you know, a group like Catalyst, or even just coming together as investors with a deal to cap their return but provide affordable housing.
Well, I'm not the expert in the room here. I don't work on affordable housing in that model. What I do is I work on broad policies at the provincial level to enable more housing affordability. So building of more of the supply that we need, and working on zoning, financing, things like that to create more affordability of that housing supply. And going back to the example that I gave earlier about public lands, I mean, that is a really good example of how you could, how the province could step up to the table and be building a myriad of housing typology and housing affordability in that model, partnering with developers and doing joint developments. And I think that we need to be pushing our provincial policymakers to be looking at those models and looking at financing. And I think it's really interesting that in Vancouver, they were going beyond inclusionary zoning and zoning for rental, like looking at zoning a whole area for rental. That's something we should consider here, both at the provincial and the municipal level. Not only zoning for rental, but why not zoning for affordability, zoning for missing middle housing, zoning for the type of housing that we're not building right now. And one of the challenges, the same reason we're not building affordable housing, the same reason we're not building rental, is because it's hard to get financing. Now, as I mentioned in my opening, that 94% of the units are sold before the shovel even hits the ground, because that's the financing model. And they build what they built last year and what they built the year before and the year before that, because that's what works and that's what the financial institutions will invest in. So if you have a structure where you zone a certain area, and it might be a GO station, it might be public land, you zone it for whatever you want, and then you go to the financiers and say, well, this is publicly backed, so you can finance this. And the developers that they're working with aren't going to be having to compete with the regular condo investors. It would just sort of change that model. It's a place to start.
And if I could just add, if I could suggest something to local people, is that social purpose investors are a great place to start looking, because where the struggles are to get those government funds, where I really see a need, and let's say you want to buy some homes and keep them affordable in your community like the Parkdale Land Trust is doing, you really need to have someone that comes to the table with money to get you through that initial stage and to go on. And there are groups that are forming to do that. I know that Van City Credit Union has an investment arm here. I'm sure there's other locals. I met a gentleman last night that's trying to do it as an individual. You know, there are people that are trying to see ways that they can start harnessing these creative financial models so that grassroots organizations can actually hold some affordability in their own community. So together with what's happening at these levels of government where we're having these conversations, the community needs to really come together and try to make these initiatives happen, I think.
Happens to be a couple elections coming up soon. You might want to formulate some questions for your candidates along those lines. Yes, we'll come back to you next, okay.
Oh.
Hello.
Sorry. Hi. A question regarding the large project on the Queens waterfront, which incidentally for the sustainability question is LEED Gold and has an urban farm on the top and a bee nest and barbecue pits.
You know it well, yes,
I do,
that's
I know
correct.
it very well. Arguably all those amenities were enabled because it was such a large project, so there's something to be said for these tall towers. Can you tell me why pairing a nonprofit with a for-profit developer was important and what each brings to the table?
I'm sorry, why pairing?
You said that on that project, and I think it was just an example, you wanted a pairing of a nonprofit community developer as well as a for-profit community developer.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So the reason for that is that number one, the for-profit developer brings the ability to attract capital and build and construct at scale. The nonprofit developer brings the deep commitment to mission, and where that is key for us in New York is on projects like that where the affordability is in perpetuity. So you want to keep the nonprofit sort of center of that for the long run because there's no end for the for-profit developer. There's no sale, there's no exit where they can take it to market and generate the kind of return that they would in another kind of a development. So we often find that kind of a marriage in New York makes sense in those situations.
Great, thank you.
This gentleman up here, you've had your hand up, you've been very patient. So there's only about 5 minutes left. Just a quick question, and one over here. Yep.
So my name is Peter Pennyfather. I'm emeritus professor at U of T. But could you comment on the unique nature of New York? It has this 2 million people, renters. People have been born there. They've rented throughout their life. They turn 90. They're still renting. They're still renting at a rate that is affordable. And you know, if they lose their job, then the rent goes down if they to a certain extent, or they can find affordable housing given in their neighborhood because there's a lot of units. So is that a very unique situation? And can Toronto learn from that?
So can I actually? It's totally. So what's New York? It's really got an interesting rental culture, but also maybe Montreal has actually got a really interesting rental culture closer to home, similar to New York. It's got the highest rates. So a quick response. I think Rafael. What's the secret sauce of a great rental culture?
No, I mean, I think it's a great point, and that's why I raised it at the very beginning, because it is the unique feature of New York. certainly for an American city. There is no American city that has a rental rate like New York does.
And the investors can count on this population to rent their units. You know,
for sure. Here's what I would say to that. You know, there was a time in New York where nobody wanted to live there,
right.
And the rental market collapsed in a very significant way. And what has happened is the city started to improve. Public investment drove a lot of that improvement over the years. And now people are flooding into New York. And so that influx of people is what's really driving both our success and our challenges as it relates to affordability.
But there was a whole thing before that called artists, and when a city was affordable, it made it also the place that people wanted to come to and be in, because it wasn't gentrified, and it did extraordinary things. So I think these affordable cities have to balance that, right? It's not just now everyone wants to live there. I guess we can declare victory. It's a problem also, right?
Right, but that's one of my points, and where I wanted to get to. It's this idea of living in the same place for 90 years, given people are mobile, given you can go anywhere in the world. So could you have
how do we get right to return to artists, to people who lived in neighborhoods? I know that this is something, Stephanie, you study actually in school. If we could just kind of bring it back to the Canadian context, Rafael, how can we have all boats rise as cities evolve and develop, and allow people to stay in neighborhoods? What are the things that you're trying to do in Vancouver to address that?
Well, Vancouver is over for 50% renters as well. You know, it's a rental strong city. The challenge with Vancouver has been that the incentive has been to develop condominiums because they make more money. And so there wasn't any rental stock created for years. And we're now at a vacancy rate of less than 1% in the city. So we have not only seen that experience, but then people get displaced, because as soon as you start to have a family, you have to leave the city. So we've had this major problem, and now this wave is being turned because our municipality is putting lands forward to develop rental. They're incentivizing market developers to do rental, purpose-built rental that would be secured for a period of time. So they're trying to put those incentives, but we're later to the game than New York, and we also didn't have, we didn't protect a lot of the spaces that were affordable. There is, all the old housing stock now is the affordable housing stock.
Okay, 3 more minutes. We've got to get 2 more people who have been patient over here. Please, a question. I know your hand came up. I wish we can get to both of them, but a quick question, given we really only have 3 minutes, but we'll try to fit them in.
Well, just a comment too. Yeah, it's possible a comment. I would like to thank Stephanie, Cherise, and Rafael, and of course you, because you have been really generous with the conversation and really had a lot of insight. But I think so, as a Torontonians, if we want to see a change, and first of all, I am from Acorn, so we fight for social change. Low income and moderate income people, is to redefine what is affordable, because affordable for me could be different than for her. So if we start from fresh, if we really want to start from fresh, we need to define what is affordable, and then we can build from that. And probably start with the income-based income, depends how much you make, so you receive a unit, a housing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, like, if you calculated your rent or mortgage, your hydro, your utilities, any kind of tax you might pay, if it's more than 30%, what you pay on a monthly basis to put a roof over your head, raise your hand. More than 30% of your income. Well, it's maybe about a third. So people are spending about 30% for shelter? That's surprising. Yeah, I'd say more 60 years. I'm surprised to be at that. You want to look at those utility bills, you want to add that up. I'd be shocked if it was really like that. Okay, this gentleman over here has got the last comment and question. You'd be lovely audience. Here you go.
Thank you. Actually, really quickly, to follow up on points that you were making about artists living in affordable places, I find that that's something that Toronto also struggles with, and it's a weird dichotomy balancing the need for both residential areas and affordable housing, but then also protecting the spaces where people do not only just live, but they also work. Like I work in the music industry, and I've lived here for 10 years, and I've seen like dozens and dozens of venues close constantly.
How many times have you moved?
I have moved. I've been fortunate to only have to move twice, and I have a great place that I'm at now, and all things considered, if my lease holds up, I will never leave. But yeah, there's another thing that we have here in Toronto where we talk a big game about wanting to be a cultural capital and a music city and all of this stuff. And on a policy level, we don't support that. And instead, condos go up in the entertainment district, and the new residents complain about noise on the street where the clubs are in the entertainment district. And all of a sudden, those clubs are now closing down, and music venues are closing down. And the landowners or the building owners are trying to turn them over and flip them to turn into other condos. And again, you know, not the right type of housing that we actually need. But then all of a sudden now we no longer have spaces for artists to live or work. So do any of you have any thoughts on striking that balance in a tasteful way?
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, Catalyst is trying to hold on to spaces that also provide those kinds of amenities for cultural groups, for artists, for craftspeople that can't access market spaces to do their work. So that's why mixed income or mixed use development is primarily what we do in the urban cores, and we try to hold on to space that can provide that really multi-purpose, multi-use, or small scale retail, like all of those kinds of things that can actually help. But Vancouver is being gutted of what has made the city charming, and you know, all the things that are in the marketing brochures, we're being gutted of it, and it's a major loss. And the protections that are in place for rental housing replacement are currently not in place for retail or independent stores or independent businesses. And I think that is a conversation we need to have at the policy level, is protecting those kinds of spaces during the redevelopment process.
I think affordability is not only a residential problem, it's also a commercial business problem. What you're describing is what's happening with our market value assessment. I think we've all heard about what's been going on in Toronto, where businesses that have been around for 30, 40, 50 years, small restaurants, music venues, the Hard Rock Cafe, which was around like forever, they're shutting down because the market value assessment that assesses the value of that business bases it on what's the best and highest use. And they think the best and highest use is the condo next door, the 50-story condo, and that then suddenly, overnight, their property taxes they double, they triple, and they're shutting down. And this is happening all over the city. It's happening in our music venues. It's happening in our little mom and pop shops. We saw it happen with the artist collective spaces. Fortunately, there was a change because people like Margie Ziegler and others fought really, really hard for the artist collectives to be exempt, the creative space, and had their property taxes reduced by 50%. But we have a municipal election coming up. My institute is doing some work on that property tax assessment. So that's one of the questions to be asking. What kind of city do we want to live in? If we can afford to live here, we'd like to go see music and stuff.
Yeah, agreed. New York City, we love you. We're going to have to leave it at that. I'm a harsh mistress, eh? Because really, we're just a bit over time, and I really don't want to get you to stay long. This has been truly fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you, Sidewalk Toronto, for putting this on. Leslie Gash is here. You can get a little FaceTime with the VP of Development and Projects. And as well, thank you, Johanna Greenbaum from Sidewalks, who's come here from New York. She did the quick intro. So mix and mingle a little bit if you still have a bit more time. Thank you again, and it's been swell.